Hi, my name is Marianne, and I'm actually from ITP in New York, which is the oldest interactive design program. And we've always been 50-50 women to men in the 30-year history. And I think in large part, I don't know how to say, I don't want to offend anybody, so I'm going to try and say this delicately, but we sort of operate around two sort of acronyms that we use that I think are sort of embedded in the academy. One is MAS, which is male answer syndrome, which is often that the first person to answer a question on any given topic is a man. And then male imparting information tone, MII, which is to say it with great importance. And so just, sorry, I really don't want to offend. But those are the two sort of things that we talk about often, and in terms of balancing just, and it's not necessarily an issue of technology, and it's not necessarily an issue of interest so much as an issue of communication and modes of communication, and so.
Yeah, can I just stick to this gender thing for just one more moment and just ask Eric to like follow up this thing that Bunny was saying, because you know, when we got to go to Seed Studio, and I remember seeing this woman in your space, and she had this silicon, and we stood there for a really long time watching her, and she was so skilled and so amazing at making these chips. And I wonder about the women that you work with and their own perception about what it is that they're doing. Like you talked about moving from the factories, moving from the farms to the factories, and then maybe thinking maybe I can make something myself. And I'm just sort of curious, like you're very close to these women who are making stuff. And I wonder about if you have any thoughts about that.
So like at Seed, it's not by purpose, but we happen to have like 50% of women in our company. But I don't feel that most of the makers are not come here as makers, but they come here as a job. Like for making things, like producing things, we require people. It's not heavy work. It's not like motors and it's not blacksmiths. So we require people to work very carefully. It can be more fine work. So women are more careful. They come from everywhere to Shenzhen and they find a job, and that's one option they can choose for sure. So it's very natural by the percentage, and we have more designers, marketing guys. They are trained as, the women are trained to be that. But as we are trying to turn ourselves into makers, then so we can work better for makers. And we discover these women makers, they have better understanding about the beauty. They will tend to make something which totally express themselves. I think that's an advantage versus these geeks. They only know how to make something powerful, more reliable. They add like, I'm not sure if it's some stereotype, but you're saying that the men are more on the logic and the women are more on the emotions. By combining together, it's like combining designers and engineers to create something more interesting. I'm not sure if I answered the question because I'm a bit lost on the question part. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Two questions for Bunny Huang. And first is, could you share some ideas about Chumby? And it's a earlier app store like hardware, and it's earlier than iPhone. And I think I'm creating a company as well. I wonder if is it too difficult to create some platform? Yeah. Should we learn something about the case, and should we say get married to the capital more and be more commercial? And this is the first question. And then the second question is about a slide you have written in a Singapore speech about open source. Just now, Pan was talking about the open source protocol. MakerBot has closed its source, and so I was wondering. You did a reverse engineer about Xbox, and so I was wondering about Shanzhai, open source, and the closed source. You wrote in the slide that Shanzhai is like a network, and the open source is. So I wonder if you could be more detailed and more deep into this subject. So that's my two questions. Thanks.
Those are big questions. Enormous questions. Okay, I guess I'll try to answer it as succinctly as I can. On the Chumby side, so just, I mean, for people who aren't familiar with it, we had the previous company I was at, which has failed and now out of business. We had tried to build a platform for distributing apps to small devices that would be like alarm clocks that could be embedded in anywhere in your house, in your refrigerator, in your stove, or wherever it is. And we failed. And he has a question, are there any learnings? Is it even worth trying to build new platforms? I mean, I think absolutely yes. We need new platforms. This is how technology moves forward. It's a really hard problem. The fact that someone has failed before doesn't mean you shouldn't try it, right? But you should be realistic about how you approach it. And platforms are really about enabling a lot of people, which is why open source is important in building platforms. Certainly you can see plenty of examples of companies like Microsoft who have failed to build platforms, spending billions of dollars putting money into it. There's lots of video game console platforms that are now dead because they were too closed, or whatever the reason may have been behind that. Part of Chumby's failure was also just, we actually raised venture capital. That was actually probably part of the problem. We had too much money too soon. We built out too much infrastructure for a sustainable play. And also we were late in delivering. So we actually had shippable hardware well before the iPhone came out, but we thought we had no competition, so we waited, and then the iPhone came out, and then we were dead. Right, basically, that was a big turning point. We couldn't pivot because we had raised money and we had all these plans in place with the investors. So it's a very nuanced answer for why we fail. If you want to build a new platform, by all means, you should go ahead. But it's a long fight, and it's about getting people in the hearts and minds of people and true evangelists to love your platform and create lots of applications for it. Without the community involvement, the platform is worthless, right? Your second question was about open source and the Shanzhai. I guess I didn't quite fully understand the question, but basically, I think I knew where you're going is there is this sort of, one thing that really surprised me when I would write about Shanzhai in my blog post and it would get cross-posted to China, is the reaction of Chinese people to the term Shanzhai, right? They almost view Shanzhai as dirty. Like it's an evil, bad thing. Shanzhai is bad, right? And I go to China and I see what the Shanzhai are doing. I think it's awesome, right? I actually strive to learn from them. I study what they do in the practice and how they innovate, because I think they do really good things. And so, one thing that I'm trying to propose is maybe if we change the term Shanzhai to get away from the stigma of it, when Make movement started, there were hackers in the United States before. And hackers is a bad term in the United States. If you tell someone I'm a hacker, they say, oh, you're going to steal my bank account, right? No, I build things, right? And so when they actually branded the movement and they created a magazine behind it, they went with the term Make, which is more neutral and not as evil, but still embraces sort of like the making part. And so from the Shanzhai side, I feel like the part that I really like about the community is the openness and the sharing. So I propose the term Gongkai, to refer to that practice of the sharing that happens, that open source nature. And I think that lowering of the barriers and that sharing that has been established in the ecosystem has really made them stronger, very competitive. There's a real strength that other cultures can study to see if they can learn important lessons from. And I haven't figured it out yet. There's so many cultural barriers and so many different things between me and really understanding the true nature of how sharing happens in China, and I'm very curious to learn more about it. But I think it's an important trend.
Do we have more questions? Oh,
I just had some thoughts on the topic about the gender thing. Yeah, I have two thoughts here. The one is I think we name it maker. It's more about hardware things. But I think the idea, the essential topic here is about innovator. So innovation is not just about hardware creation. It's about software, integral things. Maybe females are spending more time on thinking, article, ideas creation. So probably when we talk about maker, they're not involved heavily in this area. But if we look at the integral side, maybe they have more core in there. That's one topic, one thought. The second one is, actually, I think the females, they are educating people, young kids. So if they accept the idea or concept of a maker, then maybe they're not get involved in the design hardware now, but they're educating their people, their kids. So maybe 5 years later, you will have more kids working together with you. So I think females also involved in this all this process. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Are there other questions or? Okay, he's got a mic, I think, right? In the middle.
Okay, I think I have a question for the Mitch. Yeah, and you have talked about the hack everything, and especially about talking about the hack in education earlier. So I just like to, I would just want you to go a little bit deeper to talk about this idea, because I understand your points that hack is not only about making the stuff, I mean the hardware and the software, right? And we have talked about a lot of things upon the gender issues. So could you please go deeper about that part? And also I hope that you can make some comments on NYU Shanghai, because I mean the NYU Shanghai is a very special university in China right now, because we all know that Chinese education has problem. But what NYU Shanghai could be something special on bringing in the hacker or bringing some special education into China. Do you, maybe any of your panelists can talk about this? Yeah, thank you.
Just shout. Hello. Hacking to me is pretty much an ethos, a way of looking at things, a way of living, and we can hack anything. Anything can be hacked, and I think everything should be hacked, because it's about improving things, each from our own creative point of view, and in particular, hacking ourselves by the choices we make and whatever other means. Education is a really important part of all of our lives. No matter how much or how little school we've had, it's had an important part in our lives. Education is necessarily a part of acculturation for every society. Ideally, it's teaching people how to learn, because while we're alive, we're learning. And if we're alive and not learning, then I don't think we're really alive, not fully alive. So if education prepares us for the life we want to live, then that's great, real, true education as I see it. What we get in schools, on the other hand, anywhere in the world, not just China, is pretty massive acculturation, but more and more it's even less of that and more of the bureaucracies that run the schools, ensuring that the bureaucratic system endures more through time. This is not useful as I see it. It's useful for the bureaucracies. In the United States, it's all about standardized tests. If a school doesn't have its students do well on a standardized test, they'll get taken over by other bureaucracies, and they don't want to have that happen. In China, it's different, but it's still about the bureaucracies. They're churning out students with degrees, and they're trying to get enough people with high status jobs, and the students are part of this culture which is all for status and getting high pay and whatever. I mean, this is the culture in general, so there are plenty of exceptions, but school is not helping people to live lives they really want to live. I don't really know anything about NYU Shanghai, so I can't comment.
I think
on that
someone with a
particularly.
mic, right? You have a mic, right? You're probably the,
Hello.
someone there is probably the best person to say like at least a word about that. Yeah.
I'm gonna chicken out and hand the mic.
I mean, I think NYU Shanghai is writing its history right now. It opened just a few weeks ago. I mean, it's been a global studies site for a long time, and Anna can speak to that certainly because she's been one of the pioneering faculty with that. But you know, the incoming class is 151 Chinese students and 149 international students. We are starting the interactive major at NYU Shanghai. And we're building a fab lab. We're building it now as we speak. They thought we would have 4 students. We have 40 students. And all of my students are Chinese. So everything has been a surprise so far, and it's being written right now. I agree with a lot of the things that Mitch said about education, certainly in the West, and I certainly think that the university system and the increased tuition costs and, you know, setting up a path for people to be in enormous debt is eventually going to fail. I think that what's happening in the maker spaces are kind of the best, while, you know, personally maybe bad for those of us in academia, much better for the world in terms of where things will go. And when you see what's happening with MOOCs and all of that, certainly I think education is being hacked at this moment, and a lot of the educational institutions are not really paying close enough attention to it. But some of us are. And you know, I'll happily, you know, our students are going to do a show in December of their work. They don't quite know it yet. Everyone is invited to it, and we'll see. But I'm happy to talk about NYU Shanghai with anybody here. You had a microphone too.
Did other people have questions?
I was just going to add one thing, which is, since I was involved with NYU Shanghai piece in the sort of infancy of it, and I think it is a hack. No one really knew what was going to happen. But yeah, it's one of those times when I actually think the Shanghai government really got behind something that was somewhat brave, and actually opening up a different way of educating their kids was a really big deal. And all the way down to this, for me, it was about the software. It's not about the buildings. It was never about the buildings. And so the global ideas exchange that you ran, that sort of started off the sort of notion that the rest of NYU would watch Shanghai, and the ideas therefore that were global, I think was a really interesting hack around sort of how education works. And it was less about, again, what the hardware was. It was more about celebrating the sort of globalness of ideas that was all about software. So for me, and again, I'm interested in now in other governments, and I'm watching Beijing and everyone else about how they create these sort of, not one or the other, but both things, NYU Shanghai for me is an and in an experiment all by itself. So I think it's a thing that we should all watch, or be part of. I think it's great. Thank you for doing it.
Everyone's invited.
Do you have a question, Matthew?
I didn't have a question so much as a reaction. And at least 3 of you sort of iterated or expressed that making hacking is a sort of privilege of rich white men, and I have to beg to differ, and I think it's a misconception that might be created by the internet and people who have access to media and control of media. This summer I had the privilege of visiting a village in Ethiopia where access to water is the biggest problem that they face. They don't have Arduinos, they don't have soldering irons, but they were experimenting with electronics in a way that was just amazing. So I think we'll never see that portrayed in a way that, you know, right, but it is happening. Everywhere in the world, people are creatively solving the problems that matter to them, so.
The critique of it was more directed towards the term maker revolution and the branding of it, as opposed to necessarily saying that only certain people can be makers. It's just that this branding is sort of missing the point that there are makers exactly like you're saying, and we should be celebrating them as well. This is a
Okay, I'm interested in this education topic because I want to tell you a little bit. In Indonesia, we have a system that is similar happening right now. It was happening in the 17th century. There's a school that we have a format of school called Sanggar, where people come in and there's a little bit hierarchy between the teachers and students, where what's going on right now is the spirit of DIY, DIY, that people are doing stuff together. But my question is, how do you see the merging of alternative education and formal education at the right moment, and the future is going on between the makers communities and the formal education in the global?
I'd love to address that. That's why I'm here. There's a lot of infrastructure with education in our planet. There's schools in little teeny towns and villages and big cities. They're all over the place. Let's make use of these resources. They don't have to be just run by bureaucrats for the betterment of bureaucracy. That's mostly what it is right now. I would love to hack it so that the bureaucrats can keep their job, but help people get education, real education. Right now I'm working with Professor Banku sitting over there, and he's part of Tsinghua University. He's been struggling, dealing with bureaucrats over there in trying to get them to see that this works. You know, you get people together and they can create education amongst themselves. This is how it works at hackerspaces. Everyone has things to share. No matter how much they know, no matter how little they know things that other people don't. And no matter how much you know, there's things you don't know that you can learn from people you know, of any age, of any skill level. And there's been lots of interesting studies around the world of various forms of education that work seemingly much, much better than some expert standing in front of a whole bunch of people telling them knowledge. This is a way to learn. I learned a lot from that through my way too long number of years in formal education, academia. I became a teacher because of a few good teachers I had in my life saved my life, really. I don't think I would have survived without the few really good teachers I had in my life, and I wanted to give that back as best as I could. But the bureaucracy, the administration was just so overbearing in these systems, and I kind of burned out in great part because of that. But, you know, there's this guy, and I forget his name now, but he's an Indian educator. He created a project called Hole in the Wall. And Mitra, he's brilliant, and he just put a computer in a hole in a wall with a screen and some very basic infrastructures to not get destroyed by the elements, by weather, and he just left it there and and watched. And what he saw remotely was that kids taught themselves how to use the computer and the internet. They needed to learn a whole bunch of things in order to do that, but they taught themselves. Some kids were much better at learning English language than other kids, and they would teach the other kids enough so they could actually understand some of the stuff that was appearing on the screen. Other kids were much better at using the computer, the technology itself, and they would teach other kids. And he was very intrigued with this, so he started doing this in India in schools, and he would just give people some resources, give them a problem to solve, a context, and they would just stand by and just watch, give them permission to do it. And the kids who learned in this way learned amazing things, and they actually did better even on the standardized tests than the kids who went through the standardized test schooling system. Kind of amazing. I would say that this is happening at hackerspaces. We're making this up as we go along, but we're all learning a great deal. And but for me, the way I like doing it is kind of like what Mitra sets up with his hole in the wall. you put people together with some resources and a context, or maybe a problem to solve, with the addition, though, of me and other people being around as mentors. Not to tell people what to do and what not to do. We can tell them, if people ask, what's worked well for us and what hasn't. But just because it didn't work well for me doesn't mean it won't work well for you. But just know my experience, and if you do something different, just think about it, do it consciously. Maybe it'll work great for you, and then I'll learn from your experience too. Yeah, so this can go on not just at hackerspaces, but at universities, at elementary schools, and kindergartens, and middle schools, and high schools. It can go on in all these things. If teachers weren't just waiting to retire and getting burned out by the bureaucracy and waiting to retire and like getting more and more frustrated by having to teach kids who don't even want to learn because it's not an environment for learning. But if it was the same infrastructure, but with just some shift, these are great places. There's resources there. You don't have to be out in the rain if it's rainy and cold, or snow, or ice, or whatever. And there's a lot of people with a lot of knowledge, the students and the teachers, and maybe even the bureaucrats. And if we have also, in addition, a hackerspace that people can go to, or hacker spaces in schools that they can use, all the students can use as resources, as well as the bureaucrats and the teachers. We're all students, as long as we're alive. Maybe a lot of cool things can happen there. In the United States, kind of associated with this, Dale Doherty, who started Make Magazine and the concept of maker fairs, he's been pushing for, and I think it's a great idea, having libraries be also hackerspaces. Again, this is something that's in every small town in the entire United States and all of Europe. I don't know about so much in Asia, but they're great places. Anywhere you can see where there's infrastructure that's being underutilized, they can also start being more hackerspace-ish, so more people can benefit. So, yeah.
I know that there's more questions, but we have to end it here, and I'm sure our 5 panelists are sticking around for a little while, so if you guys want to chat with them, please go ahead. I want to take this opportunity to first thank our 5 panelists for their wonderful contributions and the amazing discussion today.